Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Lindsay, and I'll be the girl behind GoToWebinar. So if you have any issues or questions, please feel free to type them into the chat box. We will have time for Q&A at the end, so please give us some questions to answer at the end. So without further ado, Dr. Hamill, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Lindsay. Welcome, everybody. We're excited to be here with you today for our webinar on how to measure the impact of a great employee experience. As Lindsay said, there will be the opportunity for questions and answers, and we'll make sure to cover those at the end. So, little bit of introductions here. My name is Laura Hamill. I am the Chief People Officer here at Limeade. I'm also the Chief Science Officer. I have a background, a PhD in organizational psychology, and also just a little bit on Limeade. Limeade is an employee experience technology company. I also am joined by Lindsay Lagreid. Lindsay, you want to introduce yourself?
I do. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us today. My name is Lindsay Lagreid, different Lindsay than the Lindsay powering the GoToWebinar. We've got Lindsay, Laura, and Lindsay, so dream team. I am a solution architect at Limeade, and I have the privilege of traveling all over and meeting with leaders in organizations and listening to the challenges that they're facing around creating and curating a culturally aligned employee experience that really drives their business and their people strategy forward. And then my job is to listen to all of those challenges and then show them ways that we can use the Limeade technology to help them solve some of those problems and drive towards their business results. So it's truly a privilege to get exposure to so many different leaders and organizations, and it gives me a great amount of hope about the future of the world of work because I see so many organizations committed to investing in the employee experience and really thinking about how they can measure why that matters and why that investment is a wise one. So we want to start with the quintessential definition slide. Today we're going to be talking about measuring impact. And I think impact is one of those words that sometimes gets thrown around. And this definition actually sort of struck me. Impact is to have a strong effect on someone or something. I think oftentimes in HR and in people teams, we kind of get so caught up in the minutia and the chaos of annual enrollments and metrics and things like that, that we forget that as leaders in these organizations, we are impacting people's lives. We have the opportunity to have a strong effect on them. I think we all can think back on our own careers and think about times where our work experience was incredibly enriching and had a positive, strong effect on us. And also, unfortunately, most of us have had the inverse of that experience. So I think I just like to call out that we have this opportunity to step into that word strong. We can make your employee experience strategy an incredibly powerful part of your organization and really rewarding and enriching to those that work there.
All right, so what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about the past, present, and future definitions of impact. So maybe how this idea of impact that Lindsay was just sharing, how it's really evolved over time. And what we hope is that you start to see some opportunity in that for the work that you do. And we also hope you have something really tangible that you can take away to help define and measure impact. You know, what we're going to talk about today in some ways might be a little controversial. It might be pushing a little bit on the status quo. It also might come across to some of you as being naive, meaning, gosh, Lindsay and Laura, don't you get how hard my job is? Don't you get how difficult it is? We've been measuring these things in these ways for so long. And, you know, we just want you to understand that our intention is to really just push on that a bit, right? Just get you to think maybe a little bit differently about how you and your work, the work you do every day, could have a bigger impact. It could make a bigger difference. So that's our intention today, is just kind of push on things a little bit and maybe get you to think a little bit differently about the work that you do. So we're going to start with some questions you can kind of think about asking yourself. So the first one is, how do you currently measure the impact of your program? Now, this is assuming you have a program or something that you own. You could have a project. It could be just the work that you do every day that you maybe don't consider a program. No matter how you slice it, how do you think about measuring that impact currently? For many people maybe even on this call, you might think about it in terms of basic metrics that are related to participation. Something like how many people registered, or how many people completed something, how many people clicked this button. And it really tends to be, for most people, those kind of basic participation types of metrics.
Yeah, and that's very consistent with what I hear as I'm traveling around and visiting with our customers, is they're thinking about very sort of transactional basic program metrics. And then some are thinking about really big sort of abstract metrics, which we're going to talk about here in a few minutes. And there seems to be this opportunity to link those together and understand how one gets us to the other. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that today. But consistently, when I'm visiting with customers, what I do hear is year-over-year registration, year-over-year completion of specific activities, site visits, sort of the transactional components of a program or strategy, and a little bit less on the impact or outcome of that utilization.
One little interesting thing that I think we've experienced as we talk to customers is this term engagement, which I think is so interesting, that how can the term engagement be used so differently within the field of human resources? So we have people who think about engagement in terms of those participation metrics, right? People who just click on a link or do the thing that you kind of force them to do as participation. As engagement. And then there's a whole other part of HR that thinks about engagement much more as that, idea of having a deep connection, a sense of purpose when you come to work that leads to more, energy and more commitment. That feels so different than clicking a link or filling out a form, right? And so what we are really trying to do is, let's think about the whole spectrum of things that you can measure. And let's think about not just keeping in the space of just participation types of metrics. Let's think about this bigger idea, the stuff that, like Lindsay said, might be harder to measure, but might have a bigger impact.
So the next thing I'd ask you to consider is to think about who's asking to see this data, this impact data, the metrics around the success of the work that you're doing, maybe year over year. I think about who's in that room when you're having that annual or quarterly review of how is, fill in the blank initiative going. Who's in that room? Is it your direct managers? Are your leaders of the organization in that room? Is the CHRO in that room? Who's invested and who understands the value of the work that you're doing, and who's really curious to better understand that impact data?
And the inverse of that, right, Lindsay? Like, who's not in that room?
Absolutely.
Why aren't other people asking for that data? Why aren't there leaders that are begging for this information that you provide? Could it be because you're using metrics that don't really align with the priorities of other leaders in the organization?
Yeah, absolutely. So the next thing we want to talk about, now that we've talked a little bit about what are you measuring and who's in the room, is what's done with that information. How is it put into action? So I think about, if you'll all go back in time with me to that cartoon about how a bill becomes a law, and the little bill sort of running around Capitol Hill, turning into a law. Let's think about your annual report or your quarterly metrics, your impact data as that bill. What's happening? Once you've delivered it, it's in your inbox, you have it. Unfortunately, what I see a lot is they sort of are like, yep, I got that great report, and now it is filed in the 2019 impact folder on my computer. And it doesn't really go anywhere. It doesn't really get turned into action that drives a people or an employee experience strategy at organizations.
Yeah, and what we see is that those really best-in-class organizations are the ones that are able to connect the things that they measure all the time to the people and business strategies. So the things they measure really try to move the needle on those people and business goals. So I've been in plenty of meetings where I've heard people get really excited about things that feel really small, and I hope not to offend anybody by pointing out an example like this, but people who say, gosh, we had 10 more people register for this weight management program this year than we did last year. Or even 10 more people complete it, right? Which is a higher order than just registering for it. And I get so bummed when I hear that, because it's such kind of a small way of thinking about the impact that we could have with the focus on well-being or employee engagement or whatever it is that you're focusing on. Think about that idea of how many people registered for a particular thing that you offer versus, wow, we saw a decrease in turnover because we've changed the way our employees are feeling about working here. That we have people who have more energy during the day. They're more energized by their work. So we are able to really think differently about the work because of my program or because of my day-to-day work. So it's really thinking bigger about the potential impact we can have.
Yeah, and I think just one quick thing there, I certainly think we're not saying abandon the weight, management programs or anything like that. Those are great and should stay in place. And let's add big metrics that align to what your organization is really focused on in a bigger perspective.
Yeah, for sure. So what's working well? There's a lot of stuff that's working well. I'd say the biggest one is the fact we're even trying to measure this stuff, right? That I think most organizations now have an expectation of measurement of things that are people related, of our programs and how well they're working. So that's wonderful to have more metrics. It's this, desire to quantify something that can be really hard to quantify, and people are making progress on that. What we're also starting to see is that more and more teams, different teams within human resources, even outside of human resources, are starting to come together to understand that the employee experience, that well-being, that employee engagement, that all these things really matter, and that they need to work together. They need to break down silos in order to create more of a unified employee experience. So we're seeing that happen so much more than even, I'd say, 5 years ago. And just this kind of overarching, like solving for the employee more than solving for our own individual HR programs.
Absolutely. And I think that's requiring organizations to work in a far more interdepartmental and cross-departmental manner than they ever have before. I know just personally, I've had several meetings in the last 18 months or 2 years where we're meeting with a lot of different leaders that own different components of the employee experience at an organization. And I've actually had a situation where two of those people that worked at the same company introduced themselves to one another thinking one of them worked at Limeade, had not yet met the person that owned a very core part of the employee experience. So you have engagement and inclusion and well-being and rewards and recognition and learning and development and all these people together in a room for the first time. And it is, unfortunately, but also optimistically, the first time that these people are all in the same room. And what I find so beautiful about that is there tends to be this moment of clarity where everyone goes, oh, you're trying to help people have an amazing time while they work here? So am I, so am I, so am I. And they can use shared data to drive that strategy forward and start working together instead of almost competing internally for the timeshare and audience bandwidth of the employee population.
So what's not working? I guess you probably are getting the gist of it so far as we've been talking, but I'd say it feels like we're playing small with the importance of the employee experience, with the importance of well-being, with the importance of engagement. We tend to make things small, get things we can wrap our hands around, things that we feel like we can control. So we feel like we're measuring smaller things. And it seems also that there's a reticence, a fear, a hesitation to measure the stuff that matters. So it's been interesting to me as I've talked to people about this, where people will say, well, that's not my job. I don't own the employee experience, or I don't own employee engagement. A whole other group owns that, or I don't own turnover. Turnover is a way bigger problem than I can take on. It's not my job. It's kind of one of my the worst things I hate. I hate hearing it's not on my job description. It's above my pay grade. Then whose is it? And who actually in your organization, if it is on their job description, who they would, I'm sure, embrace your assistance in helping to make that happen. So I think that we tend to think that this is too big, it takes too much work, it feels too hard, and it feels really risky, to put yourself out there and say, gosh, this work that I do every day, it could make a difference in the employee experience. So I think that, go ahead, Liz.
I was just going to say, I think there's also a risk of not doing this. Yes, it feels risky to maybe abandon some old ways of thinking about evaluating programs and successes, but the flip side of that coin, I think, is a far greater risk. If we keep playing small and measuring small and staying within our little square over in our corner, instead of realizing that we're this integral piece of a really big and important puzzle, that puzzle piece may be eliminated. Organizations may stop investing thoughtfully and intentionally in these types of strategies and programs and initiatives if we keep playing small. And we simply know that this is such important work, and the experience that people have when they come to work impacts their lives. And so the risk of not thinking differently, the risk of not changing, to me, may be far greater, because it may mean the end of these types of investments and initiatives. And so having those higher level conversations is really exciting and energizing. One of the other things that I've personally experienced in the sort of bucket of what's not working is I've had several occasions where we have these great philosophical conversations about how we think about the impact of these programs. And we're talking about measuring big and connecting different departments and doing all this fantastic work. And then 2 weeks later, we'll get a request for the exact same report that we did last year with the exact same data. And when we sort of say, well, I thought we had just talked about measuring all sorts of different things and working with different departments, they say, oh, well, yeah, but I need to just deliver my Q2, how many people participated in X, Y, and Z report. That's really what I'm being asked for. And so sometimes it feels like one step forward, two steps back. And so part of the intention of today is to help you all leave feeling like you know how to chart this new path and how to take that first step into thinking about impact in a different way.
So in so many ways, it makes sense why we are where we are. You can think about, especially for those of you who are in this wellness/well-being industry, it's evolved so quickly. Things have changed so much. And in some ways, you can kind of think of the analogy of, having a foot in two different boats, one foot in the past and one foot in the future, and you're kind of doing the split. And those boats are moving away from each other. So what we really argue is that you got to take the leap and move forward into the boat that's going forward in this more future focus that really starts to emphasize well-being as an integral part of the overall employee experience, not something that's separate, that's down in the basement, that has nothing to do with anything else. It's a key component of a healthy and thriving work environment. So we really think that this is the time to start thinking differently. And there's so many external forces. Lindsay has reminded me, she's a little more hip than I am, that really now we're competing so much more with outside resources. There are so many direct-to-consumer apps that are out there, like HelloFresh and Noom and Mint and Headspace, all these free apps to download that really are in some ways really compelling well-being interventions, well-being resources. What we would argue is that the value that you can provide as you jump to that next boat, as you go into the future, is less about that and more about your organization's culture and identity and what you're really trying to create through your employee experience, how you're trying to show your employees that you care about them, that they matter, that you need them to be there, and you need them to be thriving. So one of the things that almost always gets asked in these kinds of conversations is, yeah, but what about the fact that my CFO always wants to associate everything that I do with healthcare costs or claims data? And we just wanted to put out there just some things for you to think about. We're not saying that this stuff doesn't matter. We're not saying that you shouldn't do it. What I think we would argue is be aware of the issues and challenges with doing it, but also be measuring some things that are bigger, that are more integral to the employee experience if you're doing this kind of work. So some challenges to think about with using healthcare cost and claims data. The first one is probably the biggest, most obvious one, is just this idea that, gosh, how do we, it is a big feat, a big undertaking to think that we're going to be able to significantly impact the social determinants of health. They're so difficult to influence. So what I'm talking about when I say social determinants of health, those are those conditions you live in. So you think of them like socioeconomic status, education, the neighborhood you live in, your access to healthcare. There's this huge contextual piece to where we live, how we live, that has a big impact on things like healthcare and healthcare costs. So that's a big part of it. Sometimes when we focus on well-being, it starts to cost more, right? When people start to like shine a light and think about the things that they want to work on to have a higher quality of life, sometimes there's more costs associated with that than being kind of in the dark and not facing some of the issues you have. The healthcare system, as we all know, has so many flaws. It's inconsistent and outlandish when it comes to just how we charge people for things, the cost of them. A lot of the things that happen in the healthcare system sometimes aren't really controllable by people. For example, you can have a really expensive medical event, an auto accident, or a difficult birth, and those aren't really controllable, right, by individual people. And just to add on top of it, when you use claims data, it can be very complex. Often there are errors in the claims data itself. There's a big gap between when the claim is actually submitted and when you can analyze it and when it's part of your data set. And it also can have a really negative effect on the perception of trust in an organization. It can feel very big brother. So we always like to just kind of put that out there of saying, yes, if you want to focus on this, just be aware of all the things that you should be aware of and think about what else could you be measuring that could make a bigger difference. So what you can focus on instead. So healthcare consumer behaviors, did you see your primary doctor? Did you get a flu shot? Are you doing the things that are basic within your control kinds of measures? Some of them are preventive, and those are good things. Are people doing those kinds of things to prevent bad things from happening? Are they focusing on well-being behaviors? Are they really making time for themselves? Are they moving? Are they thinking about their financial well-being, their emotional well-being? You could also think about the cost of turnover, how you connect the work that you do to turnover and how much money you could save the organization by decreasing turnover. You could also be thinking about employee engagement. And I'm not talking about that participation version of engagement. I'm talking about that deep connection, sense of purpose you can have at work. Connecting your work to employee engagement. That can really, and how you can sustain employee engagement and really help employee engagement be something that's part of a norm, not an exception. I like to think about how well-being and engagement go hand in hand. You could think about engagement as the engine that runs your company, that gets the results that you want. And well-being's the fuel to that engine. It's the way you're able to sustain that over long periods of time. So it's connecting well-being and engagement can have a really big impact. Also, just how you think about the culture that you have. Is it an attractive culture? Are you easily able to attract new candidates, and also are you able to retain them? There's such an important dollar value on that. Think about, does your recruiting team have an awful time trying to get people to come and work in your organization? Or for every single job opening, do you have hundreds and hundreds or thousands of applicants? That is a huge savings to the organization when you have a culture where people are attracted to it. They want to work in your organization.
Yeah, and as you look at this slide, you may be looking at some of those things and going, okay, well, yeah, healthcare consumer behaviors and well-being behaviors, that's my wheelhouse. I own that specific part of the strategy if you happen to be someone who owns the well-being component. But you may be saying turnover, engagement, culture, that's not my job. That's someone else's job. That's this other department. And as we spoke about earlier, we're going to challenge you to think differently. Everyone plays a role in the organization's culture. Everyone is a part of this, and you can actually help architect a place where there is less turnover and people are more engaged. And furthermore, I would be willing to bet that the leaders of your organization, they're being kept up at night because of turnover and engagement and being an attractive place to work. They're a little bit less concerned about how many people maybe got flu shots or participated in the most recent step challenge. Again, we're not being dismissive of those things, but I do want to encourage you all to align what your job does to the things that your organization's leaders, your CHRO, cares about, so you can help them and be viewed as an ally in contributing to solving some of the challenges and problems that they face every day.
So we have an approach that's on this slide called the Limeade Results Model. The idea with this is to define the spectrum of things that you could be focusing on as you think about measuring the success of your program or your project or your approach. So you can see we have on the left-hand side things like participation or achievement or even user satisfaction, some basic things that probably need to happen. But then what we argue is you need to then think about the other kinds of results that actually start to have more and more impact on the business. So how do we start to think about changing the quality of people's lives, improving that quality, and how does that have an impact on people results like employee engagement, like inclusion, like turnover, and then on business results. So you can think about this as you can move and really evolve your approach to move more and more to the right and get closer and closer to business results.
And one of the things that I think can be kind of a helpful activity is to actually start with the business results, to sort of go in reverse. So let's say you work at an airline. I am sure that airline, as someone who travels a lot, cares about on-time departures. And maybe there are other metrics like how long it takes bags to get off the plane and to the pickup carousel, or rebooking same customers. Maybe you work in a healthcare setting where patient outcome or patients coming back to the hospital or healthcare setting is one of your measures. Maybe it's sales, maybe it's in manufacturing, time to delivery, or quality, or reduction in safety incidents. Think about, what does your business, the leaders of your organization, consistently bring up and care about? What are they sharing in quarterly reports? What are they reporting on regularly to the organization and even publicly? So once you have those business results, we know pretty unanimously that more engaged employees are more likely to get you that business result, whatever the business result may be, whether it's patient outcomes, on-time flight departures, or reductions in safety incidents. And then we know that there is that amazing relationship between well-being and engagement, the fuel and the tank, like Laura talked about earlier. And so how can you think about the programs and strategies that you design as facilitating people and investing in their well-being and improving their overall quality of life so that they can be more engaged, so that the organization can thrive and achieve those goals? So I sort of like starting at business results, going back to program, and then coming all the way back to business results. I think it can be really helpful because I've seen so many, some customers and some programs just stop at one. They figure if everyone's participating, we've done our job. A lot of other strategies, I think, stop at sort of level 3, like we sort of stayed in our square, we've improved things over time, and because people are participating, some things have shifted. And that's fantastic, but you're missing that thinking big, big impact, strong impact of the people and business results.
So what we really encourage you to do is think about how these all connect together. So if we had to say it in words, that the most successful programs foster participation, they help people start to build new habits that really improve well-being, and this starts to impact how people feel at work and how they perform at work, and that leads to better business results. So that's what we're encouraging you to do. Think about this whole continuum. Think about this cycle. Think about how these things are related to each other.
And a big part of the reason that we're encouraging you, and maybe even zealously encouraging you to think about things like your people and your business results, is that these dollar amounts are so astronomically huge in comparison to how we're measuring things today. So burnout may cost up to $17 billion a year across just physicians in the U.S. Turnover can cost a business up to 213% of the annual salary for a highly skilled employee. And companies with high engagement are 78% more profitable and 40% more productive. So while it is absolutely amazing, and I would never encourage anyone to abandon a program that helps people quit smoking, and maybe you got 20 more people to quit smoking this year than last year, and that's fantastic. And that probably did save your organization money, and it absolutely had a profound impact on those 20 people's lives. Let's also add some of these other things, because I guarantee you that in the millions and billions of dollars is when you start to get more attention and more support and more alignment, because you're all centered on the same goal. Because at the end of the day, everyone in your organization wants and needs the business to be successful. So we just think there's such an opportunity for people in these roles owning these employee experience strategies to step into their power and step into the fact that you have this massive opportunity to have a really profound and strong impact at your organization, far beyond just participation and utilization or even some small cost savings. Big, huge billions and millions of dollars are available for you to play a role in saving your organization. And to make that real for you all, we are actually going to do a little activity where we are going to calculate the cost of turnover and disengagement. So two of the people results that we talked about a lot were turnover and disengagement. And this website is available to you all. If you want to go there now, you certainly can. It's limeade.com/impact. Additionally, you can this link will be sent in the follow-up email so that you can play around with it. But the reason that we put this together as a tool for you all is so that you can actually tangibly see what some of these millions and billions of dollars are. We were doing this live at an event, and we asked everyone to pull out their phone calculators and start putting in some of these numbers, and people are going, oh, I must have done something wrong. There's way too many zeros. And that's really the truth. So let's walk through one of these. We're going to start with the cost of turnover. So let's say I have an organization, we have 10,000 employees. We know that the average turnover rate in the United States is 22%, and we know that the average salary is $65,000. Now, when you go here, if you want to go to limeade.com/impact, you can put in your own turnover rate, your own number of employees, and your own average salary. But look at that number in the blue, $107 million turnover is costing your organization. It takes so much energy and bandwidth and time to recruit and interview and hire and onboard folks that this is an enormous budget line item that oftentimes is sort of not looked at. And if you could be part of reducing that turnover rate by curating an organizational culture and an environment where people feel cared for and supported and are really thriving, we are talking about millions of dollars of savings. And then let's also talk, if we can scroll down, to the cost of disengagement. Now, we've talked a little bit about engagement, this sense of commitment and energy and loyalty to the organization where I'm excited every day to get up and I'm excited to go to work and solve some of these problems. Disengagement is the inverse of that. It's where you're driving there and you secretly hope that maybe the building burned down overnight and you're going to show up and it no longer exists. or you'd rather go anywhere else. You're trying to take any other exit off the freeway than going to your organization. And it can actually become something where you cause the people around you to also have negative feelings towards the organization. And that situation, that experience amongst employees costs the organization money. So again, let's say I have 10,000 employees. We know the average rate of disengagement across this country is 17%. And again, we know what that average salary is. We're talking, again, millions and millions and millions of dollars. And again, I would invite you to come in here if you have engagement data or disengagement data around your own population, to enter that and put in your own average salary so you can actually have the real numbers of sort of the opportunity that's available to you.
And just to emphasize the point you said, Lindsay, about disengagement, it's not just that people who are disengaged aren't engaged, right? And aren't maybe as excited to come to work or as productive. It's also that they can have a negative effect on a lot of other people. They have the kind of tendency to be more negative, maybe even to the point of being toxic to other people, and impact the work of others. Also, just the idea of they don't come to work as much, right? And then that gets really confounded then also with turnover too, that they tend to be people who you have to let go. So there's a lot to this idea of disengagement that's not just not being engaged. And that's why it can cost an organization so much.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, limeade.com/impact, that link will be sent to you all. We would encourage you, maybe sit down with some leaders in your organization and say, have we ever thought about these numbers? Are these types of things we want to be measuring? We have partners that can help us tackle some of these things, but we just have found this a very eye-opening experience for some of our customers.
So to sum up kind of what we are talking about today, what we really encourage you to do is take action, make a change. And here are some of the things that we can think of that you might want to take on. So first, think about the success metrics that make the most sense for you, your program, your project, and your organization. Remember, try to take that kind of higher order, that higher level view of how can the work that you do every day impact people and business results. And really think about how you could be working with other parts of the organization and create more alignment. So you could be creating alignment with other parts of the human resources function to try to solve some of these bigger problems together. Talk to one of your leaders, right? I bet if you talk to your CHRO or if you talk to your CEO and really found out from a people perspective and from a business perspective, what were they the most worried about, what they saw as the biggest gaps, that you have the opportunity to work on that, to contribute to that, to actually connect what you do every day to that. And then we also encourage you to think about, you got to use, I think, technology. Most organizations are big enough that you can't do this by yourself. You need technology to be able to really help you scale that and measure the success of your work. So what we hope you got from this conversation is a little push, a little nudge to try to think differently, to question the status quo, to think bigger about the opportunity you have. I know it feels, for some of you could feel risky. It feels like, oh, I already have a hard job. Why do you want me to make it harder, Laura? But what we think and what we see, because we've seen customers do this, that you can have a much bigger impact in the work that you're doing every day. So now what we'd like to do is open up and see if anybody has any questions. Also, anybody wants to share some of the things that they've done. We're also, of course, want to learn from you too. So anything that you'd like to chat, or please type into the questions in the chat box. We believe in big silences to give people a chance. So that's what we're doing right now.
Great. Our first question just came in. What can you do when management is not willing to invest the extra time and effort into promoting a current well-being platform?
So what I would suggest you do is kind of reverse engineer that. Do kind of what Lindsay was suggesting. What if you actually talked to management, whatever level you are referring to, and said, okay, like my stuff aside, tell me what you're worried about from a people perspective. Tell me what your business results are that you care deeply about. And maybe, I wouldn't say in 100% of the cases, but in many of the cases, I could argue that there's a connection to well-being. There's a connection to how people feel at work about their quality of life, how they're treated at work, just really overall concepts and constructs that we're trying to cover when we think about well-being. So I would go to them instead of asking them to promote what you're doing. Connect what you're doing to what matters to them. Lindsay, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question, and it's a struggle that I think a lot of our customers face. I think at the end of the day, it really comes down to a function of prioritization. Management has a lot on their plate, and they're just trying to order things in a way that makes the most sense and makes the most sense in their mind to what they're trying to do. So one of our customers works in the restaurant space, and as I'm sure you all have experienced having been to a restaurant, being a manager of a restaurant, there's a lot of things going on, a lot of competing priorities, sort of a revolving door of employees because it's, seasonal work or sort of shift work, a lot of complexity. And so they weren't seeing management really support the well-being initiatives that they had so thoughtfully put together. What they knew is that restaurant managers are evaluated based on return customers. How many people came back to the restaurant because they had a good experience at this specific location? So that is a key driving metric for those managers. And so what we did is we helped them understand that there's a relationship between engaged employees and return customers. And I think we can all think of an experience where we're like, never going back to that restaurant because I had such a poor experience with the people that worked there because they were clearly not engaged in their work, and the opposite, where you maybe even remember their name and are excited to see them, and it's become one of your quote unquote regular spots because those people were engaged in their work and committed to providing you a good experience. So that's the first thing. We moved from what's important to those managers, which is same restaurant return customers. Then we took a step back. That's the business result. We step back to the people result, making the connection that more engaged employees, and again, we're using engaged, meaning committed and excited and invested in the work. We made the connection between engagement and same store, same restaurant returns. And then we talked about the relationship between well-being and engagement. So it's almost a word problem where you can sort of fill in these blanks and write this narrative. And what's so beautiful is it's very consistent. Whatever the business result you're after or thereafter, more engaged employees are more likely to get it for you. And we know that well-being is the fuel in the tank of employee engagement. And so that's how we saw it was so amazing, because those managers all of a sudden managed to find time in their morning stand-up to talk about the well-being program because we made it matter to them.
Awesome.
Thank you. Another question. You mentioned a few of the functions that should be pulled together and coordinated in order to create an excellent employee experience. Can you share the most important functions both in and outside of HR?
So to me, and again, Lindsay, jump in on this, I'd say the learning and development function, I'd say the talent management function, including sometimes within talent management, employee engagement is part of that, but whatever group also owns employee engagement, I'd say internal comms would be a good one. Sometimes that's in HR, sometimes it's not. Some of the coolest things that we've seen happen is when you pull in groups that are related to outcomes that matter to your organization, like a safety group or a patient engagement group if you're a healthcare system or hospital system. So think about, the metrics in your organization that maybe even have their own departments. Why wouldn't you pull them into this conversation? What else would you add to that, Lindsay?
Yeah. I tend to find that your internal communications people are real amazing allies on this journey, mainly because I sort of think of them like an octopus. Like they've got their arms in every single department because they're helping communicate on behalf of that department. So they can oftentimes be that connector that says, oh, yes, I know there's this inclusion and diversity initiative happening. Oh, I know there's this patient-centered outcomes initiative happening. Oh, I know there's this attracting and retaining millennial female engineering talent initiative happening. They tend to kind of have a pulse on a lot of different groups. So I think they're critical to have in the room, or can be a real amazing ally to help you get the right people at the table. So tapping that person, building a relationship with them, and having them help you figure out that internal landscape, I think can be really valuable.
Thank you. Our next question, we are doing an engagement survey and there is no specific question on well-being. Have you connected well-being and engagement research?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the first thing I'd say is start rallying right now to get a well-being question added to your employee engagement survey. I often have found people, nowadays are much more open to that. So that would be one thing I'd suggest. Even a question as simple as, overall, I have well-being in my life, or this organization supports my well-being. If you could get one or two of those kinds of questions added, that would be great. But if you don't have that opportunity, or if they're keeping it pretty tight in terms of adding survey questions, what I would recommend is doing what is called a linkage analysis. So what you can do is, and it depends on how big your organization is, but let's say your organization is larger, you could look at well-being results. Hopefully you have some way of measuring that independently. Look at well-being results by location, side by side with engagement results by location, or whatever measure. It could be department, it could be division, whatever organizational kind of variable that you tend to use. And you can do this as kind of rigorous as you'd like, or also just kind of rudimentary as you'd like. Literally looking at that data side by side, you start to see trends, I think, in many cases. Maybe not every case, but in many cases. You could just look at that data side by side, or you could do some statistical analysis on it, right? Just look at the correlation of that data, or you can start to look at some more advanced statistics. So that linkage analysis is a really good place to start. Even if when you start graphing it, if you look on it on like a scatter plot of those two things together, it's usually, I've seen many cases where it looks really interesting and compelling, meaning areas where there tend to be low well-being, there also tends to be lower employee engagement. So that's one of the things that I would suggest. Now, if you can't do any of those things for various reasons, what I'd encourage you to do is go look at external research. There is good external research that's been done by lots of different organizations on the statistical connection between well-being and employee engagement, and that's very compelling too. It could be a starting place to start to convince people that you need to start measuring those two things together.
Thank you, Laura. Our next question, Lindsay, I think you can take this one. Can you please describe again the process of connecting the well-being metrics to people and business? So step 4 and step 5. Wellness platforms really focus on participation and biometrics.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to walk through that one more time. So let's take an airline, just because I travel all the time. Let's say that you work at an airline, and you know, because every quarter we're talking about on-flight departures, we're talking about number of delays, we're talking about people that have signed up for our loyalty programs. Whatever those metrics are that my organization cares about, those are my business results. Those are number 5. There is so much existing data that Laura just alluded to that really has proven this so many times over and over and over again that it's almost become a truism within the world of organizational psychology that more engaged employees get you better business results, and better business results you can sort of fill in the blank and choose your flavor. So there is very likely research saying that more engaged employees are more likely to get you more on-flight departures because they're thinking about creative problem solving, they're fully present, they know what they're supposed to do, they're excited to work with their team, and on and on and on. So we've got on-time departures. Engaged employees are more likely to get us more on-time departures. We know at Limeade, and it's been reinforced by the scientific community, that there is a strong relationship between well-being and employee engagement. So having that feeling good and living with purpose in my life also helps me feel connected and committed and energized by the work that I'm doing. And so that's really that second half of that story, is the relationship between well-being and engagement and business results. Now, I'm really glad that you called out wellness platforms really focus on participation and biometric. I unfortunately couldn't agree with you more. I think there are a lot of wellness and well-being organizations that have thought that their job was done when they get to 3. Limeade has taken a different approach. We have engagement dashboards, inclusion dashboards, turnover dashboards. We've helped some of our customers with unique sort of business result metric analysis. And so I would encourage you to ask your partners to help you think bigger and also to align internally. One of the things that often happens is we're eager to talk to organizations about something like on-flight departures, and they say, or on-time departures, well, I don't have access to that data. It's again sort of that answer of, it's not my job, it doesn't fall within my scope. So figure out what those business results are, figure out who measures them, and then, like Laura was just saying, if you don't have the ability to all do it in one place, do something like a link analysis where you're looking at the airports that have the most on-time departures and airports that report having the highest level of well-being and engagement. So unfortunately, right now, I do think there's, for a lot of organizations, a need to measure these in multiple different places and ways. I do think, Limeade being one of them, there are organizations that are committed to helping solve for that and bring things together because we believe they're all interconnected. So that, I hope that helps kind of talk through steps 3, 4, and 5, or 5, 4, 3, and also talk about how you can kind of piece things together in the meantime.
Thank you, Lindsay. Our next question, how can you facilitate multi-level organizational support?
I love this question. So this is a whole other webinar to talk about that. So there is really good academic research out there called perceived organizational support, and it is the foundation for how we think about the concept of organizational support at Limeade and how we work with our customers to really help organizational support come to life. And we absolutely agree with you. It is multi-level. There are multiple areas. We talk about the idea of kind of local organizational support. So the way that the people and the things that are right around you, kind of around your desk, around your cubicle, how do you feel like those things support you? So how do you feel like your manager is supporting you as a human being and supporting your well-being, really supporting your employee experience? What about teams and peers, your direct team? What about the physical work environment? So those things that are right around you, how well those support you. And then outside of that, more organization-wide. So you can think about the leaders of the organization. You could think about the culture. You could think about the tools and programs that are offered. So there's definitely this, I think the best way to think about this is from many different angles. So what we can do is we'll share out a document that describes that model and describes that approach so that you can dig into it a little bit. But what we know, again, we can talk, and Lindsay loves this stuff too, we could talk about this for another hour, but what we know is that if you really want to do this, if you really authentically are trying to take on well-being, the employee experience, improving engagement, it is not as simple as having a program that people go and do independently by themselves and everything gets fixed. It absolutely requires that the organization surrounds that employee and supports it. So that is really pretty critical to this whole thing. Lindsay, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I love that you asked the question, how can you facilitate? Because I think one of the things that happens is a lot of organizations are doing a lot of wonderful things to demonstrate care and demonstrate that the organization supports their people, but they're happening in 20 different places. And we're expecting each individual employee to be motivated to navigate this very complex internal landscape of different programs and departments and intranets and SSOs from one thing to the other thing, and it sort of becomes this rabbit hole. I think one thing you can do to facilitate organizational support and that demonstration of care is have one way that you reach all of your employees. So they don't have to go to different places, and no longer is the expectation that the employee needs to be motivated to find these resources, but that the organization invests in serving it to employees in a way that's relevant to them. So we know that the majority of the workforce today is mobile. So do you have a way that your leaders can connect to employees through their mobile devices? Do you have a way that managers can communicate or facilitate conversation and growth and new habits as a team? Do you have a way that you can help people understand what tools and resources are available to them? And do all three of those, along with a million other examples, all happen in one place? Or is it sort of an internal jungle gym to try to find resources? I think too often, we get, I've met with so many human resources leaders that are so frustrated because they're offering so much. They have such rich benefits, and they're doing these forward-thinking, innovative things directly into response of what they've heard from employees, but they're delivering it in a way that does not reach the employee. And how can you demonstrate care and support if you can't even reach that person? So I think from a facilitating that support, finding that one place where you can reach all employees in a way that they want to be reached is a critical first step.
Thank you, Lindsay. We have time for one last question. What is the best way to measure how people are feeling at work and their employee experience?
So I'll start. I keep doing this. I'll jump in. So it absolutely is what you could be doing through an employee engagement survey. What is unfortunate is many employee engagement surveys I'm using air quotes, you can't see, are employee engagement surveys. They're not really. They tend to be job satisfaction types of surveys, meaning they're asking employees to evaluate their work conditions. So meaning I like my benefits, I have clear goals, those kinds of things that you're just kind of stepping back and looking to see, oh yeah, that's pretty good, my work's okay. And that is not an employee engagement survey. So an employee engagement survey is when you start to get to how it feels to work there. It's this idea of feeling, again, that connection, that sense of purpose through your work. Those are all feelings. I can't tell you if you feel that way or not. You, the employee, have to tell me. It's things like, do you feel valued? Are you excited about coming to work most days? Do you feel challenged at work? Those are all about the feelings of work. And what I'm excited about is more and more we're understanding that that's what matters. It's not about those basic, conditions. Those actually are table stakes. So if you don't have those, then that's a problem. But really what moves the needle, really what makes the biggest difference is how employees feel about their work and when they're at work. And I really think, need to embrace that and realize that that's the difference. That's the differentiator is how people feel. So I would just encourage you to think about the design of your employee. If you're not doing an employee engagement survey, create one that focuses more on those. If you are doing a survey, quote unquote, air quotes, employee engagement survey that only is about work conditions or job satisfaction, start putting in some of these items, and I think you'll see some really interesting variability in your organization on those results. Okay, there were some other questions that were really fun questions, but sorry we didn't get to them. I just want to say, on behalf of Lindsay and I, Lindsay, you can speak for yourself too, but thank you so much for your time today, for listening to us. Again, I hope you got our intention was just to kind of push and nudge and just get us to think a little bit differently about this idea of impact. And we will be following this up and sending out the slides as well as this organizational support, a little bit more detail on organizational support. We just really thank you so much for your time. Anything else you want to add, Lindsay?
Just again, thank you so much. These questions that we got were so incredibly thoughtful. Just know that Limeade is here as a resource. The work of Laura and the Limeade Institute is absolutely incredible and allows us to really bring not just research, but also research and action to our customers so that you can really feel empowered and excited about the opportunity to curate a really powerful and impactful employee experience at your organization. So thank you so much for your presence and your amazing questions.
Thank you.